Scene 1, April 30, 1943. The waters off the coast of Huelva, Spain were dark and foreboding as HMS Sarah, a British submarine, sliced through the Atlantic waves under the cover of night. The chill of the water permeated the steel hull as Commander Bill Jewell ordered his crew to prepare for the unusual mission. Inside the cramped vessel, Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montagu and Flight Lieutenant Charles Colemandelli watched with nervous anticipation as sailors carefully brought a sealed steel canister from the refrigerated storage. The canister contained the body of a man who would change the course of World War II, though he would never know it. The corpse, dressed in a Royal Marine uniform with a briefcase chained to his wrist, was about to become the most effective decoy in military history. As the submarine surfaced briefly in the darkness, the crew worked quickly and silently, lowering the body into the frigid waters where the currents would carry it to shore. Montagu and Colemandelli exchanged a glance, a mixture of hope, anxiety, and the grim reality of what they had done. They had given a dead man a life that never existed, and now they were placing their faith in his final journey. Scene 2, London. Several months earlier, the war room at the Admiralty building was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. High-ranking military officials and intelligence officers gathered around a large map of the Mediterranean, where the next Allied offensive was being planned. The target was Sicily, but the Germans knew it was the logical next step. The beaches would be heavily fortified, and the cost in Allied lives would be catastrophic. As the discussion grew more heated, a quiet voice cut through the noise. It belonged to Ewan Montagu, a relatively unknown naval intelligence officer with a background in law. "What if we could convince them we're going somewhere else?" he proposed. The room fell silent as Montagu outlined an audacious plan that had been percolating in the minds of a small committee known as the 20 Committee, so named for its role in double-crossing German intelligence. The plan was codenamed Operation Mincemeat, and it centered on a dead body carrying false documents. The idea was so outlandish, so macabre, that many dismissed it immediately. But as the realities of the Sicilian invasion became clearer, the desperate plan began to look like the only viable option. The briefcase chained to the corpse's wrist would contain letters suggesting that the Allies planned to invade Greece and Sardinia instead of Sicily. It was a gamble that hinged on the Germans finding the body, believing the documents were genuine, and acting on the misinformation. The success or failure of thousands of Allied soldiers now rested on the shoulders of a man who was already dead. Scene 3, the morgue at St. Pancras Hospital in London was cold and sterile, a place where the living rarely ventured except under the most somber circumstances. It was here that Montagu and Colemandelli came to select the body that would become Major William Martin. They needed someone who appeared to have died at sea, whose body would show signs of drowning and exposure to cold water. After weeks of searching, they found their candidate, a 34-year-old Welshman who had died from pneumonia after ingesting rat poison. The man had no known relatives, no one who would miss him or come forward to claim his body. He was perfect. As they stood over the corpse, Montagu felt a twinge of guilt but quickly pushed it aside. This was war, and sacrifices had to be made. The greater good depended on their success. Over the following weeks, they meticulously crafted Major Martin's identity. They gave him a fiancée named Pam, complete with love letters and a photograph. They created a detailed backstory, including overdue bills, a letter from his father, and theater ticket stubs. Every detail was designed to make him seem real, to give the Germans a complete person to investigate rather than just a set of documents. The briefcase chained to his wrist would contain the false invasion plans, but it was the man himself, the life they had invented for him, that would sell the deception. As they prepared the body for its final journey, Montagu couldn't help but wonder about the irony of it all. A man who had died alone and forgot would soon have the most important mission of the war, a mission that would save countless lives at the cost of his own posthumous dignity. Scene 1, the 20 Committee operated from a nondescript building in London, its windows blacked out against the nightly bombing raids. Inside, the atmosphere was a peculiar blend of academic detachment and the high-stakes tension of a casino floor. This was the nerve center of Britain's double-cross system, where captured German spies were turned and used to feed disinformation back to their handlers. It was here, in Room 55, that the outlandish concept of Operation Mincemeat was forged into a viable plan. Ewan Montagu, a man whose sharp legal mind was now entirely devoted to the art of deception, paced the small office. His partner in this extraordinary endeavor, Charles Colemandelli, sat hunched over a desk littered with papers, his RAF uniform slightly rumpled, his brow furrowed in concentration. Colemandelli was the dreamer, the one who had first resurrected the idea of using a corpse to carry false documents, an idea that had been floating around intelligence circles since before the war. Montagu was the pragmatist, the organizer who could turn a wild idea into a a meticulously detailed operation. Their contrasting personalities made them an effective team. Montagu, with his polished demeanor and connections in high places, could secure the resources they needed. Cholmondeley, with his eccentric brilliance and attention to the minutiae, could construct the intricate web of lies that would give their fictional major a life. They spent countless hours debating every aspect of the plan, from the type of briefcase to the ink used in the letters. They knew that German intelligence was not stupid. The WWII was staffed by intelligent, meticulous professionals. To fool them, their deception had to be perfect. Every detail, no matter how small, had to withstand the most intense scrutiny. The weight of the coming invasion of Sicily and the tens of thousands of lives that would be lost if it failed pressed down on them with every decision they made. The briefcase, chained to a dead man's wrist, was not just a prop. It was the key to unlocking the Mediterranean theater, and they were its locksmiths. Scene 2, the creation of Major William Martin, was an exercise in forensic storytelling. Montagu and Cholmondeley understood that the Germans wouldn't just examine the documents, they would investigate the man who carried them. The deception had to have depth, texture, and a believable human core. They began with the basics. Major Martin needed to be plausible. He was given the rank of a staff officer, high enough to be carrying important documents, but not so high that his presence on a plane would be unusual. He was assigned to the Royal Marines, a logical choice for an officer being transported by air. His uniform was carefully selected, not new, but showing signs of wear, with a few missing buttons to suggest he had been living in the field. Then came the light. They invented a fiancée, a woman named Pam. Cholmondeley, with a flair for the dramatic, penned a series of love letters, filled with tender moments, inside jokes, and gentle rebukes. "I do hope you will be able to get some leave soon, darling," one letter read, "as I am getting rather tired of dining alone." The letters were written on different types of paper, with varying ink, to make them seem authentic over time. A photograph of a young woman was procured, an MI5 secretary who agreed to pose as Pam. To add a layer of poignant realism, they included a bill from a London jeweler for an engagement ring, a reminder of a future that would never be. The briefcase, the central symbol of their operation, was a standard-issue British military attaché case. They chose it for its ordinariness. It was not flashy, not remarkable, which made it perfect. Inside, alongside the false letters, they placed other personal effects: a receipt for a shirt from a tailor in Savile Row, a ticket stub for a performance of Hamlet at the Haymarket Theatre, a letter from his bank manager regarding an overdraft, and a stern letter from his father, a retired judge, complaining about his son's spending habits. Each item was a brushstroke in the portrait of a real, flawed, living man. The most critical documents, however, were the two letters from Lord Louis Mountbatten, Chief of Combined Operations, and General Sir Archibald Nye, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff. These letters, carefully crafted to seem authentic, discussed the upcoming Allied invasions of Greece and Sardinia, mentioning Sicily only as a feint. The letters were marked with security classifications and handled with care to show signs of being read and reread. The briefcase, chained to the corpse's wrist, was now a vessel containing a complete fabricated life and a future that would reshape the war. Scene 3, the logistical challenges of Operation Mincemeat were as complex as the psychological ones. The first and most morbid problem was acquiring a suitable body. Montagu and Cholmondeley needed a corpse that had died from causes that would mimic drowning and exposure. They couldn't use someone who had been autopsied or died from a violent death, as the German pathologists would surely discover the truth. They worked through a network of coroners and pathologists, their request cloaked in the utmost secrecy. For weeks they waited, their plans on hold, the fate of Sicily hanging in the balance. Finally, they received word. A man had died in St. Pancras Hospital. His name was WWII, a Welsh tramp who had no known family and had died from eating rat poison that contained phosphorus. The phosphorus in his system would help mask the time of death, and his body was in good condition. It was a grim solution, but in the calculus of war, it was acceptable. The body was placed in cold storage, and the work of transforming WWII into Major William Martin began. They dressed him in the Royal Marine uniform, making sure it was slightly tight to suggest weight loss. They placed the personal items in his pockets, including the key to the briefcase. The love letters from Pam were tucked into his breast pocket, close to his heart. The briefcase itself was a masterpiece of deception. It was fitted with a waterproof container to protect the documents, but it was designed to fail after a certain amount of time in the water, ensuring the Germans would be able to access the contents. The chain was attached securely to his wrist, a detail that was crucial to the story. The official cover story was that Major Martin was a courier, carrying documents too sensitive to be sent by normal channel. If he were to be killed in a plane crash at sea, the chain would ensure the documents remained with him. Every element of the plan was designed to be discovered, to be pieced together by the Germans to form a coherent and believable narrative. As they prepared the body for its final journey, Montagu and Comendeli felt a strange mix of emotions. There was the professional satisfaction of a job well done, the thrill of the intellectual challenge, but there was also a profound sense of the macabre. They were giving a name, a life, and a mission to a man who had died in anonymity. Glyndŵr Michael would become Major William Martin, and in doing so, he would play a part in saving countless lives he would never know. Scene 4: The choice of Huelva, Spain. As the drop point was a deliberate and calculated decision, Spain, though officially neutral during World War II, was a hotbed of espionage. The fascist government of General Francisco Franco was sympathetic to the Axis powers, and German intelligence agents operated freely throughout the country. The British knew that any documents found on a body washed ashore in Spain would almost certainly find their way into German hands. Huelva, in particular, was an ideal location. It had a German Abwehr station run by a man named Adolf Kloss, who was known to be both competent and ambitious. The coastline had the right currents to carry a body from the drop point in the Atlantic to the shore. Furthermore, the British had a capable and well-placed intelligence officer in Huelva, the vice-consul, a man named Francis Hazelden. Hazelden's role was crucial. He was not to actively participate in the discovery of the body, but he was to monitor the situation, to ensure that the Spanish authorities found it and that the news reached the Germans. He was the unseen hand, guiding the deception from the shadows. The British also knew that the Spanish would conduct an autopsy, so they had to ensure the body would withstand the examination. The cause of death had to appear to be drowning, and the time of death had to be plausible. The phosphorus from the rat poison was a key element in this, as it would confuse the toxicology reports. The entire operation was a high-stakes game of international chess, with Montagu and Comendeli moving their pieces from London, Hazelden observing the board from Huelva, and the Germans as their unsuspecting opponents. The briefcase, with its chain and its false documents, was the queen on the board, the most powerful piece, and its sacrifice was designed to win the entire game. As the HMS Seraph prepared for its mission, the fate of the operation, and potentially the war in the Mediterranean, rested on the currents of the Atlantic, the efficiency of the Spanish bureaucracy, and the gullibility of the German intelligence service. The plan was audacious, complex, and morally ambiguous, but it was also the best hope the Allies had for achieving a decisive victory in Sicily without catastrophic losses. Scene 5: On the night of April 30, 1943, the atmosphere aboard HMS Seraph was tense with anticipation. Commander Bill Jewell had gathered his crew in the main cabin and explained the nature of their mission. He told them they were carrying special meteorological instruments that needed to be launched into the sea. It was a necessary lie, as the true nature of their cargo would have been too disturbing for many of the young sailors. Only a handful of officers knew the truth. As the submarine reached the designated coordinates, just a mile off the coast of Huelva, the crew sprang into action. The steel canister containing the body of Major William Martin was brought up from the refrigerated hold. The air in the submarine grew cold and heavy as they worked. Montagu and Comendeli, though not physically present, were there in spirit, their months of meticulous planning coming down to this single, crucial moment. The canister was open, and the body, dressed in its Royal Marine uniform with the briefcase chained securely to its wrist, was carefully removed. Commander Jewell read the 39th Psalm, a traditional prayer for those buried at sea. The crew stood in silence, a mixture of reverence and unease. Then, with a final check of the currents and the position, the body was gently lowered into the dark, churning water. As the submarine submerged and slipped away into the night, the body of Major William Martin began its final journey, carried by the tide toward the Spanish shore. The first phase of Operation Mincemeat was complete. Now came the waiting, the most agonizing part of the plan. Back in London, Montagu and Comendeli waited for news, their nerves frayed, their hopes pinned on a dead man and a story they had invented. The briefcase, now alone in the vastness of the Atlantic, was the key to everything. If it was found, if the story was believed, the course of the war would be changed. If not, the deception would fail, and the invasion of Sicily would be a bloodbath. The fate of thousands of soldiers now rested with a corpse and the lies it carried. Scene 1: The morning of April 30, 1943, dawned bright and clear over the fishing port of Punta Umbria near Huelva. A local fisherman, Jose Antonio Rey Maria, was casting his nets into the calm waters when he saw something unusual floating in the distance. As his boat drew closer, the shape resolved into the body of a man in a military uniform, washed up on the rocky shore. Rey Maria, a practical man accustomed to the sea's grim offerings, hauled the body aboard. It was clad in a dark green Royal Marine officer's uniform, a life jacket still strapped to its chest, and a steel chain was locked around its wrist, attached to a black attaché case. The discovery was immediately reported to the local authorities. The Spanish police, led by a Sergeant Delgado, arrived to secure the scene. scene. They noted the chain on the wrist, a detail that struck them as odd and significant. The body was taken to the morgue in Huelva, and the briefcase, still locked, was set aside for examination. The news of the discovery traveled quickly through the small town, reaching the ears of the local German intelligence agent, Adolf Kloss. Kloss, a shrewd and ambitious man, immediately recognized the potential importance of the find. A dead British officer carrying a chained briefcase off the coast of Spain was too significant to be a coincidence. He discreetly made inquiries, learning that the body had been found with personal effects, including letters and bills. The Spanish authorities, following standard procedure, contacted the British vice-consul, Francis Haselden. Haselden, playing his part perfectly, expressed concern and requested that the body and its belongings be returned to British authorities as soon as possible. He made no mention of the documents inside the briefcase, acting as if the personal effects were the primary concern. This carefully calibrated performance was designed to whet the Germans' appetite. The more the British seemed to want the body back, the more valuable the Germans would assume the contents of the briefcase to be. The stage was set, and the first act of the deception was playing out exactly as Montagu and Comandelli had scripted it. The briefcase, the central symbol of their plan, was now the object of an intense, behind-the-scenes intelligence battle. Scene 2, the Spanish authorities, under pressure from both the British and the Germans, found themselves in a delicate diplomatic position. Officially, they were neutral, but their sympathies lay with the Axis. The decision was made to conduct a thorough examination of the body and its belongings before turning them over to the British. A local doctor, Eduardo Fernandez del Torno, was tasked with performing the autopsy. His findings were crucial to the success of the deception. The body was that of a man in his mid-30s, dressed in a Royal Marine uniform. Dr. del Torno noted the presence of phosphorus in the body's tissues, a fact that he found puzzling but attributed to the prolonged exposure to seawater. He concluded that the man had died from drowning and exposure, having been in the water for an estimated 5 to 10 days. This timeline was perfect, aligning with the cover story of a plane crash at sea. While the autopsy was underway, the Spanish military began to examine the briefcase. They managed to pick the lock, careful not to damage the contents. Inside, they found the personal effects of Major William Martin, the love letters from Pam, the theater ticket stubs, the bill from the tailor, and the stern letter from his father. These items painted a vivid picture of a real person, a detail that did not go unnoticed. But the most significant discovery was the set of official military documents. There were 2 letters, one from Lord Mountbatten and one from General Nye. The letters were marked personal and most secret, and discussed Allied plans for the Mediterranean. They mentioned an upcoming invasion of Greece, codenamed Operation Husky, and a diversionary attack on Sardinia. Sicily was mentioned only as a potential target for a feint designed to draw German forces away from the main landing. The Spanish officers who read the documents were stunned. This was intelligence of the highest order. They immediately made copies and passed them on to the German Abwehr station in Madrid. Adolf Kloss, upon receiving the copies, was ecstatic. He believed he had stumbled upon a massive intelligence coup. The documents were detailed, authentic-looking, and the story of the dead courier was entirely plausible. He immediately sent a coded message to Berlin, reporting the discovery and forwarding the copies of the documents. The deception was working. The Germans had found the body, they had opened the briefcase, and they had swallowed the story whole. The briefcase, chained to the wrist of a dead man, had successfully delivered its lethal payload of lies. Scene 3 in Berlin. The documents from Major Martin's briefcase landed on the desk of one of Hitler's most trusted intelligence analysts, a man named Alexis von Rhone. Von Rhone was the head of Fremdheer West, the section of German military intelligence responsible for evaluating the strength and intentions of the Western Allies. He was known for his intellect, his thoroughness, and his ability to see through enemy deception. The fate of Operation Mincemeat now rested in his hand. If he saw through the ruse, the entire plan would collapse. Von Rhone and his team subjected the documents to an intense and rigorous analysis. They examined the paper, the ink, the signatures, and the security classification. They cross-referenced the names and units mentioned in the letters. They even investigated the personal life of Major William Martin, trying to verify his existence through their own channels. Every detail they checked seemed to confirm the authenticity of the documents. The letter from General Nye to General Sir Harold Alexander, the commander of the 18th Army Group in North Africa, was particularly convincing. It discussed the Allied order of battle, the allocation of troops and resources, and the strategic thinking behind the planned invasions of Greece and Sardinia. The letter was written in a style that was consistent with other communications from Nye's office. The personal effects found on the body also played a crucial role in convincing von Rhone. The love letters, the theater tickets, the overdue bills, these were not the kind of things that would be included in a simple deception. They suggested a a real person with a real life, a level of detail that went far beyond what was necessary for a simple hoax. Von Roon became convinced that the documents were genuine. He believed that the Allies had made a catastrophic error, allowing one of their most important couriers to die at sea with a briefcase full of top-secret plans. He prepared a detailed assessment for Hitler and the German High Command, stating with confidence that the main Allied invasion would come in Greece, with a secondary attack on Sardinia. Sicily, he argued, was merely a diversion. This assessment was exactly what Montagu and Cholmondeley had hoped for. They had gambled that the Germans would be so impressed by the sheer volume and quality of the misinformation that they would overlook the possibility that it was all a fabrication. The briefcase, with its carefully crafted contents, had successfully deceived one of the most intelligent and skeptical minds in German intelligence. The lie was now accepted as true, and the German High Command was about to act on it. Scene 4. The reaction from the German High Command was swift and decisive. Hitler himself was convinced by von Roon's assessment. He had long believed that the Allies would try to attack the soft underbelly of Europe through the Balkans, and the documents from Major Martin's briefcase confirmed his strategic intuition. On May 12, 1943, just 2 weeks after the body was discovered, Hitler issued Führer Directive No. 40. The directive ordered the reinforcement of the Balkans and the Mediterranean islands, specifically mentioning the threat of Allied landings in Greece and Sardinia. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Entire divisions of German troops were diverted from the Eastern Front, where they were desperately needed to fight the advancing Red Army, and sent to Greece. The 1st Panzer Division, a powerful and highly mobile armored unit, was moved from France to Greece. Additional troops, artillery, and aircraft were sent to Sardinia and Corsica. Coastal defenses in these areas were strengthened, and minefields were laid in the approaches to the beaches. In Sicily, however, the German forces were left relatively untouched. The German commander in Sicily, General Hans Hube, was stripped of many of his best units, which were sent to bolster the defenses in Greece. He was left with a patchwork of Italian divisions, which were poorly equipped and had low morale, and a small number of German troops. The Allies couldn't believe their luck. Through Ultra, their top-secret code-breaking operation, they were able to intercept German radio traffic and monitor the movement of German troops. They watched in amazement as divisions were pulled out of Sicily and sent to Greece and Sardinia, exactly as they had hoped. The deception was working on a scale that even Montagu and Cholmondeley had not dared to imagine. The briefcase, with its false documents, had not just fooled a few intelligence analysts. It had fooled Hitler himself and had caused a massive redeployment of German military assets. The stage was now set for the Allied invasion of Sicily, codenamed Operation Husky. The beaches that would have been heavily defended were now vulnerable, the path to victory cleared by a dead man and a pack of lies. The success of Operation Mincemeat was a testament to the power of deception in warfare, a demonstration that a well-told lie could be more effective than an entire army. Scene 5 in London. Montagu and Cholmondeley waited anxiously for news from Spain. They had no way of knowing for sure if their plan had worked until they received confirmation from their own intelligence sources. The weeks that followed the dropping of the body were a time of intense anxiety and second-guessing. They replayed every detail of the plan in their minds, looking for flaws, for mistakes that might have given the game away. Was the uniform right? Were the letters convincing? Had they chosen the right drop point? The pressure was immense. The fate of thousands of soldiers and the success of the entire Sicilian campaign rested on their shoulders. Finally, the confirmation they had been waiting for arrived. It came through Ultra, the British code-breaking operation that was intercepting and decoding German radio traffic. The intercepts showed a massive increase in German radio traffic concerning Greece and Sardinia. They revealed the movement of German troops and equipment away from Sicily and toward the phantom targets. The Germans had taken the bait. They had completely fallen for the deception. When Montagu and Cholmondeley received the news, they were overwhelmed with a mixture of relief and elation. Their audacious, macabre plan had worked. They had successfully deceived the German High Command and had paved the way for a successful invasion of Sicily. But their joy was tempered by the knowledge that they could not share their success with anyone. Operation Mincemeat was one of the most closely guarded secrets of the war. To reveal its success would be to risk compromising Ultra, the source of their intelligence. It would also be to admit to the macabre nature of the operation, which might have caused a public outcry. So Montagu and Cholmondeley had to keep their triumph to themselves. They could not tell their families, their friends, or even their colleagues. They had to carry the burden of their secret, knowing that they had changed the course of the war but could never take credit for it. The briefcase, the symbol of their deception, had served its purpose. It had delivered its lies and had vanished into the mists of history, its true story known only to a handful of men. The operation was a success, but for its architects, it was a victory that had to be celebrated celebrated in silence. The Ghost in the Machine. Scene 1. The pre-dawn hours of July 10, 1943 were filled with a tense, electric energy that hummed through the massive Allied armada assembled off the coast of Sicily. Over 2,500 ships, a forest of masts and hulls stretching to the horizon, carried 160,000 British and American troops. In the sky above, thousands of paratroopers and glider-borne infantry prepared to drop behind enemy lines to secure key bridges and crossroads. This was Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, and it was the largest amphibious operation of the war thus far, a rehearsal for the even larger invasion of Normandy that would come the following year. On the flagship of the Western Naval Task Force, General George S. Patton, commander of the U.S. 7th Army, paced the bridge, his ivory-handled revolvers holstered at his hips, his face a mask of grim determination. He was a man of action, eager to get his men onto the beaches and into the fight. Miles away, on another ship, General Bernard Montgomery, commander of the British 8th Army, studied maps and intelligence reports, his mind focused on the complex choreography of the landings. He was a meticulous planner, and the success of the invasion depended on the precise coordination of air, sea, and land forces. Neither Patton nor Montgomery knew the full story of how their path had been cleared. They knew that intelligence suggested the German defenses in Sicily were weaker than anticipated, but they did not know about the dead man with the chained briefcase, the elaborate fiction of Major William Martin, or the audacious deception that had sent German divisions scurrying off to Greece. For them, the success of the initial landings would be a testament to Allied firepower, courage, and planning. They would never know that the most critical element of their success was a ghost, a phantom army conjured out of paperwork and a corpse. As the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, the invasion fleet began its final run toward the beaches. The roar of hundreds of naval guns shattered the morning silence as they began to pound the coastal defenses. The air filled with the scream of shells and the stench of cordite. The moment of truth had arrived. The gamble of Operation Mincemeat was about to be put to the ultimate test on the beaches of Sicily. Scene 2. The first waves of Allied troops hit the beaches of Sicily at 2:45 hours under the cover of darkness. The American forces, landing on the western and southern coasts, encountered surprisingly light resistance. The beaches were not the killing fields they had feared. The Italian divisions, demoralized and poorly equipped, offered little more than a token defense before surrendering or melting away into the countryside. The German units, though tougher, were fewer in number than expected and were concentrated in the wrong places. They were prepared for an attack, but they were not prepared for an attack of this scale, and they were certainly not prepared for it to come here. The British forces, landing on the eastern coast around Syracuse, faced a stiffer test. The German Hermann Göring Panzer Division put up a fierce fight, and the British paratroopers, scattered by high winds and anti-aircraft fire, had a difficult time securing their objectives. But even here, the absence of the 1st Panzer Division, which was now dug in Greece, was keenly felt. The German commander, General Hube, found himself outmaneuvered and outnumbered. He simply did not have the troops to stop the Allied onslaught. As the day wore on, the beachheads were secured, and the Allied armies began to push inland. Pat, true to form, raced his men westward, determined to capture the port of Palermo before Montgomery could reach Messina. Montgomery, ever methodical, advanced up the eastern coast, fighting a series of bloody battles against the German rearguard. The invasion was a success, but it was not without cost. The fighting was brutal, the summer heat oppressive, and the terrain rugged. But the initial breakthrough, the establishment of a secure foothold on the island, had been achieved with far fewer casualties than anyone had dared to hope. The success of the landings was a direct result of Operation Mincemeat. The German High Command, convinced that the main attack was coming in Greece, had left Sicily vulnerable. The phantom army of Major William Martin had done its job. It had drawn the German lion's share of troops away from the real battlefield, allowing the Allied forces to land and establish themselves before the Germans could react in force. The deception had worked perfectly, and its success was being written in the sand and blood of the Sicilian beaches. Scene 3. As the Allied armies advanced deeper into Sicily, the German High Command in Berlin began to realize that they had been deceived. The scale and ferocity of the invasion made it clear that this was not a diversionary attack. Sicily was the main target. Hitler, who had been so confident in von Rohn's assessment, flew into a rage. He felt betrayed, not by the Allies, but by his own intelligence service. How could they have been so foolish? How could they have fallen for such an obvious trick? He summoned von Rohn and other intelligence chiefs to his headquarters and berated them for their failure. The atmosphere in the bunker was thick with fear and recrimination. Von Rohn, who had been so certain of his assessment, was stunned. He could not understand how he had been so wrong. He had checked every detail, every piece of information, and it had all seemed so genuine. He had fallen victim to the most classic of intelligence errors. He had seen what he wanted to see. The documents from Major Martin's briefcase had confirmed his own preconceived notions about Allied strategy, and he had accepted them without question. The German response was too little, too late. They began to rush reinforcements to Sicily, but the Allied armies were already firmly established on the island. The Germans could no longer push them back into the sea. The best they could hope for was to conduct a fighting retreat and save as many of their troops as possible. The battle for Sicily turned into a race, with Patton and Montgomery competing to be the first to reach the port of Messina, the gateway to the Italian mainland. The Germans, under the command of the brilliant Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, fought a masterful rearguard action, using the rugged terrain to their advantage and slowing the Allied advance at every turn. They evacuated over 100,000 German and Italian troops across the Strait of Messina to the Italian mainland, troops who would later be used to defend Italy from the Allied invasion that would follow. But despite their skillful retreat, the Germans had suffered a major defeat. They had lost Sicily, a vital strategic position in the Mediterranean. The Allies now had a base from which they could launch air raids on mainland Italy and the Balkans, and they had opened the door to the invasion of Italy itself. The defeat was a direct result of Operation Mincemeat. The deception had given the Allies the initiative, and they had never relinquished it. The ghost of Major William Martin had struck a devastating blow against the Axis powers. Scene 4 in London. The success of the Sicily invasion was a cause for celebration, but for the small group of men who knew the truth about Operation Mincemeat, it was a moment of quiet, private triumph. Montagu and Comandelli followed the news from Sicily with a mixture of pride and relief. They saw the reports of light resistance and the rapid Allied advance, and they knew that their plan had worked. They had saved thousands of lives and had helped to shorten the war, but they could not share their secret. The victory belonged to the soldiers on the ground, to the generals who had planned the invasion, and to the politicians who had made the difficult decisions of war. The story of the dead man with the chained briefcase would have to wait. The secrecy surrounding Operation Mincemeat was necessary to protect Ultra, the Allied code-breaking operation. If the Germans ever found out that the British were reading their codes, they would change their encryption systems, and a vital source of intelligence would be lost. The secret of Mincemeat was also necessary to protect the reputation of the intelligence services. The use of a dead body in a deception operation was morally questionable, and if it became public knowledge, it could have caused a scandal. So Montagu and Comandelli had to be content with the knowledge that they had done their duty. They had taken a desperate gamble, and it had paid off. They had played a key role in one of the most important victories of the war, but they would have to wait until the war was over to tell their story. The briefcase, the symbol of their deception, had served its purpose. It had delivered its lies and had changed the course of the war. Now it was just a memory, a secret shared by a handful of men who would carry it with them for the rest of their lives. The ghost of Major William Martin had faded, but his legacy would live on. Scene 5, the fall of Sicily, had a profound impact on the course of the war. It was the first piece of Axis homeland to be invaded, and it sent shockwaves through Rome and Berlin. In Italy, the fascist Grand Council turned against Mussolini, and in July 1943, he was arrested and a new government was formed. This new government began secret negotiations with the Allies, leading to Italy's surrender in September 1943. The surrender of Italy was a major victory for the Allies, but it also created a new and difficult military situation. The Germans, who had anticipated Italy's betrayal, reacted swiftly. They disarmed the Italian army and occupied large parts of the country. The war in Italy would not be over. It would enter a new, more brutal phase. The Allied invasion of the Italian mainland at Salerno was met with fierce German resistance, and the campaign in Italy would turn into a long and bloody slog up the peninsula. But despite the difficulties, the invasion of Italy had been made possible by the success of the Sicily campaign, and the success of the Sicily campaign had been made possible by Operation Mincemeat. The deception had been the key that unlocked the door to the Italian campaign. It had weakened the German position in the Mediterranean, had forced Italy out of the war, and had opened a new front against the Germans. The legacy of Operation Mincemeat was not just the victory in Sicily. It was the entire Italian campaign, with all its complexities and its costs. The ghost of Major William Martin had not just deceived an empire. He had helped to bring down a fascist dictator and had changed the political map of Europe. The story of the dead man who never was a story of courage, ingenuity, and the power of deception. It was a story that would be told and retold for generations to come, a testament to the fact that in war, the most powerful weapons are not always guns and bombs, but ideas and lies. The man who never was. Scene 1, the war in Europe ended in May 1945 with the total defeat of Nazi Germany. London erupted in a celebration jubilation of unprecedented scale, a cathartic release of years of fear, sacrifice, and uncertainty. In the midst of the jubilation, in quiet offices and clubs, the men who had waged the secret war began the delicate process of sorting fact from fiction, of deciding which wartime secrets could be revealed and which must remain buried. For Ewan Montagu, the end of the war brought a sense of closure and the lifting of a tremendous weight. For over 2 years, he had carried the secret of Operation Mincemeat, a burden shared by only a few. Now, he was finally free to tell the story. He was not motivated by a desire for personal glory, but by a conviction that this was a story that needed to be told. It was a story of incredible ingenuity and daring, a testament to the power of the human mind to overcome overwhelming odds. It was also a story that honored the man who had made it all possible, the man known to the world as Major William Martin, but whose real name was Glyndwr Michael. Montagu felt a profound sense of responsibility to tell the story accurately and respectfully, to ensure that the sacrifice of this anonymous man was not forgotten. He began to gather his notes, to interview the other participants, and to reconstruct the operation in meticulous detail. He wanted the world to know not just the strategic genius of the plan, but also the human drama behind it, the moral ambiguity, the sheer audacity of it all. The briefcase, once a vessel for world-changing lies, would now become a vessel for a profound truth. The story of the man who never was would finally be told. Scene 2. In 1953, 8 years after the end of the war, Montagu published his book, The Man Who Never Was. It was an immediate sensation. The public, hungry for stories of wartime heroism that went beyond the familiar tales of battlefield valor, was captivated by Montagu's account. The book was a masterclass in storytelling, blending the meticulous detail of a military report with the narrative drive of a thriller. Montagu walked the reader through every stage of the operation, from the initial conception of the idea to the final, nerve-wracking wait for confirmation from Germany. He described the process of creating Major William Martin's identity in vivid detail, bringing the fictional character to life on the page. He introduced the reader to Charles Comandel, the eccentric genius who had first proposed the idea, and to the other key players, like Commander Bill Jewell and Francis Hazelden. But the most compelling character in the book was Major William Martin himself. Montagu treated him with a dignity and respect that was deeply moving. He described the personal effects found on the body, the love letters from Pam, the theater tickets, the bill from the tailor, not just as props in a deception, but as the fragments of a life, albeit a fabricated one. He acknowledged the moral complexity of using a dead man in this way, but he justified it as a necessary act of war, a sacrifice that saved thousands of lives. The book was a huge critical and commercial success. It was praised for its honesty, its intelligence, and its gripping narrative. It was translated into numerous languages and became a bestseller around the world. The story of Operation Mincemeat was no longer a closely guarded secret. It was a part of popular history. The man who never was had become a legend. Scene 3. The success of Montagu's book inevitably led to questions about the true identity of the man who had played the role of Major William Martin. For years, the British government had refused to reveal his name, citing privacy concerns and the wishes of his family. But the public's curiosity was insatiable. Who was this man who had died in anonymity and had gone on to play such a crucial role in history? In 1996, over 50 years after the operation, the Public Record Office in London finally released a document that revealed the truth. The man who had become Major William Martin was Glyndwr Michael, a 34-year-old Welsh laborer who had died from ingesting rat poison. The revelation was a sobering moment. It stripped away the romantic gloss of the story and revealed the grim reality behind it. Glyndwr Michael was not a dashing war hero. He was a homeless, unemployed man who had died alone and forgotten in a London hospital. He had no family, no friends, no one to mourn his passing. He was, in every sense of the word, a nobody. The revelation sparked a new wave of public interest in the story. Documentaries were made, articles were written, and historians debated the ethics of using Michael's body in this way. Some argued that it was a callous and exploitative act, a final indignity for a man who had already suffered so much. Others argued that it was a brilliant and necessary act of war, a fitting tribute to a man whose death had, in the end, given his life a meaning and a purpose it had never had in life. The debate continues to this day, but what is undeniable is the power of Glyndwr Michael's posthumous story. He was a man who was invisible in life, but who became visible in death. He was a man who had no control over his own life, but who, after his death, helped to shape the course of world history. He was the ultimate everyman, a symbol of the countless anonymous individuals whose lives are caught up and transformed by the machinery of war. The briefcase chained to his wrist had made him a player on the world stage, a key figure in one of the greatest deceptions of all time. Glyndwr Michael, the man who never was, had finally been given a name. Scene 4. The story of Operation Operation Mincemeat has had a lasting impact on the world of military intelligence and on popular culture. It is studied in military academies around the world as a textbook example of strategic deception. It demonstrated the power of storytelling in warfare, the idea that a well-crafted narrative could be more effective than a division of tanks. The operation also highlighted the importance of understanding the enemy's mindset. Montagu and Comendeli had succeeded because they knew how the German intelligence service thought. They knew what they were looking for, what they would believe, and what they would question. They had not just created a lie, they had created a lie that the Germans wanted to hear. The legacy of Operation Mincemeat can also be seen in the world of espionage. The use of a legend, a fabricated backstory for an agent, is a standard technique in intelligence work, and Operation Mincemeat was the ultimate example of this. The creation of Major William Martin was a masterclass in building a legend, in creating a character so complete and so believable that he could withstand the most intense scrutiny. The story has also had a profound impact on popular culture. Montagu's book was adapted into a successful film in 1956, and the story has been retold in numerous other films, television shows, and books. It has become a cultural touchstone, a symbol of ingenuity and daring in the face of overwhelming odds. The image of the briefcase chained to the dead man's wrist has become an iconic image of espionage and deception. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of Operation Mincemeat is the human story at its heart. It is a story of sacrifice, of the idea that even the most insignificant life can have a profound impact on the world. It is a story of the power of the human mind to create and to deceive, but also to achieve great things. It is a story that reminds us that in war, as in life, truth is often stranger than fiction, and that the most powerful weapons are not always the ones you can see. Scene 5 today. The story of Operation Mincemeat is remembered as one of the most remarkable episodes of World War II. It is a story that has been told and retold, but it has lost none of its power to fascinate and to inspire. In the cemetery in Huelva, Spain, where the body of Major William Martin was buried, there is a simple headstone. It bears the name William Martin, his rank, and his date of death. For years, it was just another war grave, a forgotten marker in a foreign land. But now, thanks to the efforts of historians and the British government, the headstone also bears a small plaque that tells the true story. It reads, Glyndwr Michael served as Major William Martin, RM. It is a quiet, understated tribute to a man who gave his life for a cause he never knew, in a war he never fought. The briefcase that was chained to his wrist is long gone, but its legacy endures. It is a symbol of the power of deception, of the thin line between truth and lies, and of the incredible things that can be achieved when people dare to think the unthinkable. The story of Operation Mincemeat is a reminder that history is not just made by generals and politicians, but also by anonymous individuals, by quiet heroes working in the shadows, and by the ghosts of the past. It is a story that will continue to be told for generations to come, a testament to the man who never was, but who changed the world. Section Conclusion Epilogue. The Weight of a Lie. Scene 1. The echo of a single, audacious deception continues to resonate through the corridors of history, a testament to the fragile and often arbitrary nature of truth. Operation Mincemeat was more than a military stratagem. It was a profound philosophical statement enacted on the world stage. It demonstrated that reality is not an immutable force, but a malleable construct, susceptible to the power of a well-told story. The entire operation, from the creation of Major William Martin to the strategic diversion of German panzer divisions, was a shared fiction, a lie so meticulously crafted and so thoroughly believed that it altered the physical landscape of war. Men were moved, machines were redeployed, and the fate of nations hung in the balance, all because of a corpse and a briefcase filled with paper. The central motif, the briefcase chained to the wrist, was the perfect symbol for this paradox. It represented the weight of officialdom, the gravity of state secrets, yet its contents were entirely ephemeral, a fantasy designed to exploit the enemy's own preconception. The physical object was real, but its truth was a ghost. This fundamental duality lies at the heart of espionage, and indeed, of human interaction itself. We navigate the world through stories we tell ourselves and others, and sometimes the most potent stories are the ones that are not true. The legacy of Operation Mincemeat forces us to confront the uncomfortable question: how much of what we accept as reality is, in fact, a carefully constructed narrative designed to shape our perceptions and guide our actions? Scene 2. In the contemporary world. The lessons of Operation Mincemeat are not merely historical curiosities. They are urgent warnings. The battlefield has shifted from the shores of Sicily to the digital landscapes of social media, the 24-hour news cycle, and the dark corners of the internet. The principles of deception that Montagu and Comendeli mastered are now amplified by technology to a degree they could never have imagined. Misinformation and disinformation campaigns are waged not by small committees of intelligence officers, but by state-sponsored actors, political organizations, and even individuals, all seeking to shape public opinion and influence global events. The phantom armies of today are not divisions of panzers, but armies of bots and trolls, creating the illusion of widespread support or opposition. The personal effects used to build a credible legend are not love letters and theater tickets, but fabricated social media profiles, doctored photographs, and slickly produced videos. The briefcase, once a physical container for lies, is now the smartphone, the computer screen, the television, a portal through which a constant stream of competing realities floods our consciousness. The success of Operation Mincemeat depended on the German High Command's willingness to believe a story that confirmed their own biases. Today, we are all vulnerable to the same trap. Algorithms curate our news feeds, showing us content that aligns with our existing beliefs and creating echo chambers where falsehoods are reinforced and dissenting voices are silenced. The challenge is no longer simply to discern truth from falsehood, but to navigate a world where truth itself is often contested, where multiple, contradictory realities coexist, and where the very concept of an objective fact is under assault. The ghost of Major William Martin reminds us that our greatest vulnerability is not our ignorance, but our certainty, our willingness to accept the stories that comfort us, that confirm our worldview, without questioning their origin or their intent. Scene 3. Ultimately, the enduring power of the Operation Mincemeat story lies not in its tactical genius, but in its profound human dimension. At its core, it is a story about sacrifice, identity, and the search for meaning. Glyndwr Michael, the homeless Welshman who died in obscurity, was given a purpose in death that he never found in life. He was transformed from a nobody into a somebody, a key player in a global drama. His identity was erased and replaced, his body becoming the instrument of a grand design. This act raises deeply unsettling ethical questions that have no easy answers. Was it a noble sacrifice, a final, meaningful contribution to a just cause, or was it a final, profound violation, the ultimate dehumanization of a man already stripped of his dignity? The story offers no definitive judgment, instead forcing us to wrestle with the moral ambiguity inherent in total war. It compels us to consider the price of victory and the value of a single human life when weighed against the lives of thousands. The man who never was, Major William Martin, became a symbol of this sacrifice. His fictional life, complete with a loving fiancée and a doting father, was a poignant reminder of the humanity that was being destroyed all across Europe. The lie that saved thousands was built upon the foundation of a real death, a real tragedy. This is the final, haunting paradox of Operation Mincemeat. It was a triumph of intellect and ingenuity, a victory achieved without firing a single shot from the phantom army it created. Yet, it was also a story steeped in death and deception, a reminder that even in the pursuit of a noble end, the means can be morally complex and deeply troubling. The weight of the lie that won a war is a heavy one, and it is a burden that history continues to carry. The story of the man who never was serves as a permanent monument to that weight, a cautionary tale and a testament to the incredible and often terrible power of the stories we tell. The end story.